Welcome, everybody. My name is Zach Young. I'm an analyst at Trammell Venture Partners. We're a VC firm focused on Bitcoin native companies. Got a great group of panelists today for you all talking about building on Bitcoin. Before I have you guys introduce yourselves, I just love to say, thank you to Bitcoin Students Network for inviting us to speak and putting this on. I was a student a few years ago looking to break into the industry, and I know that a virtual summit like this would have been a really great resource for me. So kudos to you guys for putting this on. Thank you once again for inviting us to speak. Um, yeah, let's go ahead and have you guys introduce yourselves. Abubakar, if you don't mind starting, just a bit about your background and firm you work at.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Abubakar Nur-Khalil. I run a Bitcoin venture capital fund called Recursive Capital out here in Nigeria. We essentially invest in Bitcoin companies in Africa. Our portfolio includes companies like Bitnob, all the way up to Fedi. And I'm also one of the board members at the Bitcoin Students Network. And separate to that, I also run a nonprofit called Btrust, and I work on Bitcoin Core.
We,
And on my side, my name is Michael Rihani. I live here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm the head of crypto at Nubank. I actually just started about 2 months ago. If you don't know what Nubank is one of the largest kind of challenger banks and neobanks in the world. We have over 127 million customers across Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico. So started in LATAM and expanding globally. We're actually a New York publicly traded company, so we're over $75 billion market cap. I just share that because a lot of people don't really know what Nubank is. And so I'm also an advisor with the Bitcoin Students Network. Always love connecting with students and helping Bitcoiners wherever I can. And previously, resume wise, I was the crazy Bitcoin guy at a bunch of large publicly traded companies like Apple, worked on Apple Pay. Tesla did some of the Bitcoin stuff there with Elon and Co. Cash App with the crew at Block, and recently led financial services at Coinbase. So happy to share any of those pieces.
awesome. Yeah, thanks, guys. I think some of our audience may have heard things like, Bitcoin is digital gold, or you can't really do much with Bitcoin. And we're talking about building on Bitcoin today. So what exactly does that mean? Like what can you do with Bitcoin? And if you guys want to kind of explain with an example of a company that's building on Bitcoin and the role that Bitcoin plays in the business, I think that'd be helpful. Abu Bakr, let's start with you again, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. There are a variety of ways you can build on Bitcoin. I think a better framing for folks that are just thinking about this more broadly is probably leveraging Bitcoin, I think is another way to look at it. Because you can look at things around harnessing green energy, which has been a huge thing here in Africa. And a lot of that has been pioneered by companies like Gridless out in East Africa, given all the hydropower they have there. And essentially, just to keep it simple, what they're doing is providing energy to parts of Africa that don't have energy through the Bitcoin mining process. And doing so, they're able to actually use those revenues to develop local infrastructure to help with the grid, essentially the electrical grid there. And other things you can look at really is around the financial angle, unlocking flows for remittances, all the way up to novel mechanisms for startups, which is starting to come up, where they're using some of their extant cash into Bitcoin, essentially, not necessarily as treasury companies, but just as a means to stop all the bank accounts being shut down from founders from this part of the world, which is a huge challenge for the general fintech space. Hence why they tend to keep raising subsequent funds because it's difficult to kind of maintain that pool. But separate to that, I'd say even more closer to home in terms of everyday use, we have a bunch of companies from Machankura who allows for Bitcoin to be sent offline, which is a huge use case here in Africa, all the way up to companies like Bitnob, which has been pioneering the Lightning Network, as well as dollar cost averaging as a cultural movement. And lastly, I'll touch upon MavaPay, for example, which essentially allows for you to send and receive Bitcoin to local Nigerian bank accounts over the Lightning Network. So that's kind of completing the last mile because we already have instant bank transfers in Nigeria. So allowing for that increased adoption when it comes to engaging with digital currencies, specifically Bitcoin, has been a huge, huge aspect for use cases as well. So I'd say those are kind of the general things that we've seen.
Awesome.
On my side, I would highlight probably one of my favorite Bitcoin companies in the world, Block. I think there's no company in the world doing more for Bitcoin than Block, and it's a great example. So, I used to work at Cash App, which is part of Block, and just hitting on a lot of things that they're doing with Bitcoin, building on Bitcoin with Bitcoin, et cetera. So like Cash App, buy, sell, trade, send and receive on-chain Lightning. That's kind of their retail app. Tens of millions of people have interacted with Bitcoin. I think it's like 20, 25 million roughly. Then the Block hardware team, they have a lot of expertise from Apple and Square. They've been building a lot of really cool hardware things. So Thomas leads the Bitcoin team there. So they have proto mining rigs and actually building miners that are being put into data centers. They also built BitKey. I have mine upstairs, but it's a self-custody multi-sig wallet that is really cool. It feels like a rock, and you really feel like you can hold your Bitcoin. It makes it really accessible for everyday people. And then recently in the news, Miles and Jack and team have been rolling out Square Bitcoin acceptance at Square point of sale. So super cool. We worked on multiple hackathons over the years, and it's really awesome to see that in production where people can actually use their Bitcoin as everyday money to buy coffee and just do things. So yeah, I think Block is a great poster child company if you want to study all the things you can do with Bitcoin.
For sure. Yeah, big release last week, of course. The question I get a lot is, why are you and why are the entrepreneurs you back focus on Bitcoin specifically? Can't you do some of this stuff with other crypto networks like maybe Ethereum? How do you guys usually respond to that?
Yeah, happy to go for that. And I think there are kind of maybe three prongs to this question. One is it subtly assumes that all the monetary networks, or I guess all the chains, are kind of the same when it comes to the value set that they have or their resilience, which isn't the case. So a lot of that really is from the premise itself is not really applicable when it comes to weighing Bitcoin vis-a-vis other chains, specifically because Bitcoin is the most resilient and is the most decentralized. And again, the most important thing, especially going into the future, is it has no central authority to dictate both its roadmap, but also how development and funds are kind of spread into the ecosystem. So it's technically the only underground movement that is really buy-in for the people that are building for it. And specifically, those are the people that really care about the technology itself, which is kind of the best pace of people to be building it and directing its future. I think the bigger thing looking at, especially for the African lens, has been a lot of the entrepreneurs have been burnt in the past using technologies that are simply either too fragile, have a lot of centralized points of failure. And the biggest thing of all is that they're not resilient enough. And we've seen that with multiple fintechs over the years. And I think with a lot of the Bitcoin builders, one of the things that they do like to highlight and why they continue to build on Bitcoin is that resilience, but also that assurance that in the next decade plus, they still have some sort of a monetary base to be building on top of. And that type of infrastructure for a continent is vast and wide in terms of Africa, and requiring that need to kind of leapfrog technologically speaking can only be built on something just as resilient, and they'll still be sticking around over the next couple of decades as Bitcoin.
100%. Yeah, Michael, anything to add there?
Yeah, I can talk hours about why Bitcoin matters and why it's important. So I'll try to give you a 2 or 3 minute version. My own take is I also have 2 or 3 points. So number one, I'm half Lebanese, so my friends and family have lost 95% of their net worth due to hyperinflation and bank and government run kind of issues in Lebanon. The currency is hyperinflated, and it's been devastating to the country. I work for a Brazilian company at Nubank. Many of our employees live and work in Argentina. Same thing happened in Argentina. Currency's lost 99.9% of its value in the last 25 years. So I would say the number one thing Bitcoin does is it truly separates state from money. That's just never happened in the history of humanity before. So, like all the other assets don't do that. So that's the number one full stop thing that makes it why it's important, why it matters. Number two, I do think it's the biggest software invention since the creation of the internet, just from like a pure read the Bitcoin white paper technical masterpiece. You could argue AI as well, recently, but it's kind of like the internet, Bitcoin, and AI are these like massive technology innovation waves that are going to push humanity forward. So, um, do your own homework and see if you come to that same belief as I have. And then, I would say the last piece is through my journey going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, studying the history of money, looking at the future of money, I've decided I'm dedicating the rest of my career to Bitcoin because there's just nothing more important to work on, in my opinion. And I'm borrowing words that Jack Dorsey tweeted in the past. He said, "I'm not in it for the money. I'm not in Bitcoin for the money. I'm in Bitcoin to fix the money." And I'm very much in the same boat. I think fiat currency is not a great product. I'm a product guy in many countries, and billions of people are just suffering with a bad product. And Bitcoin is a great solution and product for billions of people globally. So yeah, I think my last thing I'll say is I'm not sure where your audience is. Let's assume most of it is North America. Alex Gladstein from the Human Rights Foundation has a book called Check Your Financial Privilege. It's a really good book on if you live in America, you've been in a bubble, you have Apple Pay, everything just works. You may not know how broken money is in the rest of the world. So, highly recommend giving that book and just pushing yourself to think a little bit outside your own boundaries, your own country, and have a little bit more of a world lens. Read books like that, travel the world, meet people to understand their pain points with money.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And I definitely hear you on, Bitcoin being such a kind of substantial innovation. I think, we really haven't seen a disruption in money itself in thousands of years, right? And Bitcoin is kind of leading a platform shift in money. And in the tech world, when there's platform shifts, that means, some legacy companies get disrupted and new companies that end up emerging as iconic businesses. Where do you guys see, Michael on the enterprise side and Abubakar on the startup side? Where do you see the opportunity set really emerging right now and maybe a few years down the line, that kind of as a result of this platform shift? And Michael, you want to kick us off there?
Yeah, I mean, this may be a little bit of a controversial take, but I think in the short term, medium term, call it the next 1 to 10 years, I do think the main product market fit of Bitcoin is just digital sound hard money and a store of value. And I know it's volatile, it's been going up and down recently, but when you really zoom out, it is a phenomenal asset to store your wealth in. And I know companies and folks are creating products for payments, and that's great. But there's still a lot of work for people to make that leap of faith, right? First, you need to be like paid in it to then to be able to spend it. And so, I guess my controversial take a little bit is we as builders in the industry should focus on stacking more sats is like the main goal here. And honestly, that's why I've spent the last 3 or 4 years at all these companies building products that help you easily stack more sats, right? And so at Cash App, we built roundups and get paid in Bitcoin. I also worked with all the companies I was at, Tesla, Cash App, and Coinbase, and convinced the CEO and the CFO and Treasury to buy and hold more Bitcoin, right? Just like we as individuals want to acquire Bitcoin and see the value of it just being money. There's so much more work to do there. Like Vanguard, my 401k doesn't allow me to put Bitcoin in it easily. Like I just want to do the 2050 retirement fund and just have 1 to 3% of my money in Bitcoin. So there's just so much work to do there. And my latest product I worked on at Coinbase was the Coinbase One card. And yes, it's an American Express credit card. It does not run natively on Bitcoin Rails, but it gives you up to 4% Bitcoin back, and it's meeting people where they're at. They don't need to change their behavior. They don't need to read a 500 page book and take a class on Bitcoin. You can just get a really cool card and stack sats, without stressing about the price. And you'll wake up in a few years and you'll have a pretty good strategic Bitcoin reserve for yourself, right? So I'm a big believer of just meeting folks where they're at, finding their pain points and problems and developing for it, and not just developing for Bitcoin's sake, right? Using Bitcoin just because we can. So I always obsess over those customer pain points and needs. So yeah, all those companies I've focused on that. And that's what I do personally and professionally.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think similar to Mike, really, I think it still all comes back to Bitcoin being independent money. I think that's probably one of the biggest pieces I've seen over the last 5 years for builders to kind of grok. Because not only are we talking about, like he mentioned, with hyperinflation or Windows currencies being even more volatile than the Bitcoin itself, which is funny because a lot of people early on in Nigeria were saying it can't be a money because it's too volatile, but then there is way more volatile than Bitcoin. So we've kind of passed that point in terms of essentially educating people when it comes to Bitcoin versus everything else. I do think maybe slightly differently when it comes to the short term, maybe just because of the, I guess, the context here in Africa. I think the way to look at it and kind of how we've seen the upside has been, yes, there's a lot of flows in and out of the continent with remittances, and a lot of that has been gradually translated onto Bitcoin flows. And more recently, over the last maybe I say 2-3 years, onto stablecoins as well. The mix is roughly 60 to 40 between Bitcoin and stablecoins. But I think the bigger thing really for entrepreneurs is they're able to build a money that works for them, but also at the same time innovate for a variety of ways that honestly is novel and we can't necessarily predict, which is probably even a bigger, I'd say, opportunity set for a lot of these builders. It's not so much that we can kind of give a general category of solutions that they're able to build. It's more so that the category itself is being defined real time by the success that they have as individual companies, but also as companies building infrastructure for the next set of entrepreneurs to even build on top of. So I'd say that's really the biggest upside I see, is just the independent money, the fact that we're able to build that real time. And three, I think maybe even just connecting that to existing rails, or even rails that are absent on the continent, because it's still difficult to actually interact between countries in Africa, let alone within a country itself. So for those countries that lack payment rails, Bitcoin isn't, a 24/7 rail that they can actually plug into that gives them instant access to not just the local commerce, but even commerce that's globally allowed. So entrepreneurs, folks that are getting paid, everyone really kind of benefits. So I'd say that's really where I see all the opportunity.
Awesome.
Just one thing I wanted to add. I like how you called it independent money. Haven't really heard that recently. I know other people call it
From
freedom
Jack Dorsey.
money. Yeah, there's all kinds of great terms, but I've been thinking about this a lot because I work at this company called Nubank, and David, our CEO and founder, created and named it Nubank. It sounds cool. It's spelled NU Bank, but so it sounds like a new bank. But NU, the word actually means naked in Portuguese. So when you zoom out and think about it, our company name is Naked Bank. And he did that because he wanted to drastically simplify and make the banking system in Brazil more transparent, easy to use, right? Like full kimono. If you expose yourself and you're naked, it is very easy to understand. And it's a very simple concept and it's very transparent. I've just been thinking a lot about Bitcoin being naked money as well, right? It's all out there. It's open source. You can go audit it. You can see everything, the miners, everything is decentralized. It's completely out there in the open, and it is very transparent. It's very simple. It's decentralized and it's very empowering. So anyway, I just wanted to add that because I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think that's a very powerful concept. Right now, we have this naked money that is, independent freedom money that billions of people can access and use if they want and build on it. And maybe my very last point is, I also do think it's important to say money is a human belief system. So if like 3 billion people woke up tomorrow and thought Dogecoin was money, like guess what? Now Dogecoin is money. So I do think, yes, as technologists, we can build, we can make cool apps, we can ship stuff, but you also need to ship a human belief system and movement and a change. So I think we can sometimes get a little too obsessed of the code and the technology and what people are getting physically or software wise. And I do think there's, for lack of a better term, whether it's education or just a change of the human belief system, I think is going to be a very important thing we need to work on and build upon. And I think organizations like the Bitcoin Student Network is a great way to, build more educational platforms and connect people so they can understand and develop their own belief system of what money should be, what kind of world should have what kind of money.
Yeah, great comments, guys. As we're running short on time here, I think it'd be great just to end with any advice you have for young folks looking to get involved, learn more, potentially work in the industry, and any other final thoughts you want to share.
Yeah, certainly. I like the analogy that Michael closed off on. I think it's really, really important for people that are just trying to get into Bitcoin or trying to break out into the Bitcoin, I guess, ecosystem. And I'd say maybe a couple points just to touch upon. I think the biggest one that is always good to hammer down, and I think that's something we prioritize across, both the companies that we invest in at Recursive Capital, but also the developers that we've been pushing out and supporting through Btrust and just privately, really with people that I meet, is Bitcoin is permissionless. Like, I can't stress it enough. The same way you don't need to ask people permission to find things out on the internet is the same thing you can build the future of money using Bitcoin. And I think for a lot of students around the world that are looking for that next phase after they graduate and kind of what to do with their lives, I think Michael's point around the human element or the general psychology that people kind of flock towards things that provide them hope or meaning. I think Bitcoin is one of those avenues that honestly we're pristine and kind of lucky to be in the midst of. I think for them, it's really a case of just looking at it more concretely as not necessarily I have to change for Bitcoin, but how can I plug in, given the current skill sets I have, into the Bitcoin ecosystem? How can that, not to say, 10x the skills you have, but how can that be further expanded or enhanced by Bitcoin technology? Is it a case where you move your business into accepting Bitcoin to kind of wager against inflation? In the case where you feel you have something contribute on the code side to help make sure this is resilient and stay around for future generations to kind of benefit from? Or are you more an entrepreneur? You're trying to bring this to reality and outside of the technical discussions on GitHub. And I say, generally speaking, in terms of trying to navigate the space, I think the biggest thing for folks trying to get in is definitely to keep a curious mindset, stay humble, stay focused. There's a lot of activity in the Bitcoin space. I mean, on a daily basis. I mean, X pretty much crashed earlier today, and it was interesting to see how centralized systems like Cloudflare were able to take out most of the internet, where you have common apps as opposed to money that was still around. So while the internet was still figuring out whether services still work, Bitcoin is still chugging through. So I think a lot of them really have this opportunity where Bitcoin doesn't sleep. So there's really no reason to say you have to wait for things to kind of be built. So it's really a case where you have control fully over your destiny and where you want to see yourself in life. So I'd say really that's and the general advice I have, and everything else is really a journey similar in life. So they kind of figure it out as they go.
100%. Thank you.
All right, this is dangerous. You want me to give advice? Well, first advice is don't trust anything we have said today. Go verify it. Don't trust, verify is the ethos of Bitcoin. So anything we said, don't just take it and run with it. You should go do your own homework. You should create your own opinion. Often I get people asking me like, "Oh, where should I start?" Well, watching things like this is a great start. But if you want books, videos, podcasts, you can go to my website, michaelrihani.com, and you click on Bitcoin resources at the top. I put all my top 20 or 30 resources. So check that out if you want to get started going down the rabbit hole there. Number two, I would also advise, especially if you are excited about Bitcoin and what it can do, people don't really love hearing you just blabber about Bitcoin. I've learned this by blabbering about Bitcoin for 6 or 7 years. A way better approach is actually just straight up asking them, like, what is hard for them, especially money, financial services, like what pain points do they have? Everybody will have all kinds of things like, oh, groceries are too expensive. School is crazy expensive, Medicare, all this stuff, right? Maybe remittances back to Africa is hard or Lebanon, right? So just listen to people, and then 9 times out of 10, Bitcoin will be able to like plug in and solve for problems they have. I think it's also important to remember. I just read a stat yesterday. 89% of Americans say money adds stress to their life. So I know we're excited about money and like, oh, this is exciting, but like is a really stressful topic. I think it's one of the top three reasons why people get divorced is about money, like, paying the bills. And so most people kind of hate dealing with money and thinking about money. So before you just like get super excited to tell people about Bitcoin and why it's awesome, just realize people may not be in the same boat as you. And then I would say the last advice is, just contribute, build anything, contribute on Twitter, show up online, but also show up in person, right? Like I know we're online here, but like go to meetups, go to conferences, go shake hands, go plug in a Bitcoin miner, like go do real life stuff because that's where the proof of work lays, and it's an open, decentralized network. Nobody's asking or forcing you to do more. So you got to really kind of roll up your sleeves and get in there. And once you get in there, you'll understand the community and the Bitcoin is very accepting and will welcome you with wide arms. So yeah, get out there, shake some hands, don't listen or trust anything we said, and reach out if there's ever anything I or we can do. I'm super accessible. You can ping me on Twitter or message me anytime.
100%. Thanks, guys. I would just close this out by saying, to our viewers, just by being here at this virtual summit, you are really early to a pretty transformational platform shift, as we discussed, and there's just endless opportunity to contribute. Michael said it before. I think all of us would be, quite receptive to outreach if you have any questions or we can ever be helpful, point you in the right direction. Bitcoin Students Network is a great resource as well. So tons of opportunity. Abubakar and Michael, thank you so much for your time today. And to our viewers, thank you for watching. Hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.